This is our next presentation. There's a few extra posters here if anybody wants to take them when you go. It's on by Carrie Sapsford, who is the compost nerd at the Compost Corner. So she's going to be talking about composting in your backyard, and we'll also have a little bit of history of agriculture in this area along with that. So that's next year. Another thing I want to say is thank you to Grant Thornton for the Timbits and the coffee again. And we really appreciate their participation in this. And also, if you happen to enjoy leaving donations for things that you like to do at the museum, there's a box right here. We enjoy receiving them. Thank you very much. I want to introduce John Daisley, who I know a number of you know, so I'm not going to tell you anything about him because I do not know him. So he is the president of the Forest History Society of Saskatchewan. All right. And so I think today might be the first presentation we have from him, because I think there's a lot of stories that we can tell, and I'm sure John can tell them or other people can tell them, about the history of forestry in this area. There's a lot of history. So I'm going to let John get started with that.
Thank you, Connie. Welcome, everybody. So, as Connie said, I'm representing the Forest History Society of Saskatchewan. And we're a diverse group of people who have an interest in what's gone on in our Saskatchewan forests in the past. Some of us, some of you, have worked in the forest industry, either for government or for industry, or had parents or relatives that have worked in the forest, and others are just folks that are interested in what's gone on in the forest over the past 100 and some years since our forests started to be utilized by the settler culture. So we communicate each year with our members by publishing a little magazine called Echoes in the Forest, Saskatchewan Forest Tales. We also conduct meetings similar to this in a number of communities across the province. There we typically do a presentation and then have a discussion afterwards. People ask questions, provide me with information, and so on. We plan meetings this year. We've already had one in Nipawin and one in Meadow Lake. Here we are in Prince Albert today. We're hoping to have a meeting in Big River this summer and in Hudson Bay when I get around to it. Because I'm from Hudson Bay, of course, they say that a prophet is never really that popular in his hometown. I'm open to having a meeting in other locations as well. We've had some interest from Tisdale and Melfort. Some of the topics we've covered in the Echoes publication, I've tried to do some that are relative to Prince Albert. Volume 2 has a story about the Sturgeon Lake Lumber Company. Sturgeon Lake Lumber Company was based here in Prince Albert, but their mill was just south of the current boundary of the PA National Park. There's a lake there called Bell Lake, and they actually had a community there, even had its own post office called Omega, was the name of the post office. They had their sawmill at that location, and they hauled the finished lumber from there. I think it was 30-some miles on the ice road to Prince Albert. We had a story about the Prime Minister and the logger. In the Hudson Bay area, they had a major river drive that drove logs down 3 different rivers. It started down the Little Swan River, into the Adamwami River, and then just south of Hudson Bay, it joined the Red Deer River, went down the Red Deer River to Red Deer Lake in Manitoba, where the big sawmill was. This particular year, they had low water, and where the Edamame and the Red Deer River join is a rocky, shallow area. By the time the logs got there, there wasn't enough water to float the logs, so the log drive stalled. So there were a lot of log drivers hanging around waiting for the next big rain. And Prime Minister Laurier was coming through. At that time, the main rail line ran from Swan River up to Prince Albert. He was coming through campaigning, and he stopped in Hudson Bay for a whistle stop, and he heard there were a bunch of people down by the river, as all these loggers were stalled there. So he went down, and according to Pat Hendren, he said Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier came down to the Wanigan, which is the floating cook shack that follows the log drive, and he bought us all train tickets. Brought 40 of them to Prince Albert to listen to him give his stump here, and put them up in a hotel and paid their tickets home again. Pat said, we voted for him, but he lost the election. There used to be a log drive on the Little Red River. Nowadays, if you look at the Little Red River, you might wonder how the heck could they have a log drive on this? But they had a lot of expertise in water management. Just south of the national park, those of you that have been around for a while will remember where the buffalo paddock used to be.
Yep.
Anyway, just south of the national park, they dammed the Spruce River, and they created a lake that they called Shoal Lake. They would build up water in that Shoal Lake. They would load the logs onto the ice during the winter, and then further upstream, right in what is currently the park, they actually diverted another river into the Spruce River. The national park in the last few decades have actually reversed that, and now that water flows north into the Arctic watershed the way it was meant to. But at that time, it flowed south. And they had what they called splash dams along the river, in addition to the Shoal Lake. So they would build up water and basically flush the logs down the river. And they had a crew of about 200 men spread out along the river doing what these guys are doing, pushing those logs off the banks into the water flow. So that's quite an interesting episode, I think. The Shell River as well was used as a log drive. And those logs were then staged at the mouth of those two rivers and were hauled by a boat like this, a stern wheeler, to the mill, which was at the very east end of Prince Albert. The ones that came from the Shell River, the old rail bridge actually pivoted in the center so that it would open wide enough for the logs to come through. And I know the museum has some pictures of that. We've done an article on marking timber for harvest in the mid-1900s. In those days, every tree that was cut was supposed to be marked by the government timber cruisers ahead of time. And if you can see in that picture, you can see a blaze on the top of the tree at about this height. They also blazed the stump, and then they used a marking hammer. They marked both blazes. After the logging was done, the government inspectors could go through. If they found a stump that didn't have a blaze and a stamp mark on it, they knew that the company had trespassed and cut timber that they weren't supposed to. That system actually existed right up until 1960s for sure. Logging with horses was a big thing. This is a picture of a group of horses. Now, I'm not sure if they're going to or coming from the woods, but they're being transported between the farms where they are rented and their winter work, where they work in the woods. And we've done an article on the introduction of chainsaws, where we went from trying to cut logs like that, which they did for years and years, to the very first type of chainsaw. It's a two-man chainsaw. There's a handle on this end and the motor on the other end. I think I'd rather be on the other end, even if it was heavier. And I found this article particularly interesting, of a sawmill on an island in the Saskatchewan River. And that is downstream from Nipawin, actually closer to Cumberland House. And the only access was by water. So part of that story was of a young fellow who got married, and he and his wife were going to go and spend the winter in at the sawmill. And they had to go by barge down the river to where they would spend their winter at the logging operation and sawmill. And one of the things that I'm always looking for is photos of the old DNR patrol cabins. There used to be DNR patrol cabins scattered across the province where the patrolmen traveling on horseback would stay overnight. If anybody has any photos, I'm interested. And we've also done a story about the first sawmill in Prince Albert, featured in volume number 3. This photo is courtesy this museum. That's Moore's Saw and Grist Mill. Not a very impressive structure, but before they had a sawmill like that, lumber had to be made using what they call a pit saw. So it would be a stand, one man on top with the end of a manual saw, one man down below, and they would pull it back and forth, back and forth. And you just think about how hot that work would be, and especially for the guy down below with all that sawdust coming down. We did an article on those type of saws as well. But today's topic is about the Canadian Forestry Association Conservation Tree Planting Car. Beginning in 1919 and up until 1973, the Canadian Forestry Association, in cooperation with the CNR and the CBR, conducted a program of forest education and tree planting, using a dedicated rail car as a traveling schoolhouse. When touring Saskatchewan, the programs presented, or in southern Saskatchewan, it's primarily soil conservation and tree planting for shelter belts. Shelter belts around farmsteads, shelter belts between fields. When you travel south of Prince Albert, with the exception of the poplar bluffs around sloughs, virtually every tree south of here has been planted. When visiting communities in the north, the conservation car emphasized conservation of the forest, of the soil and water resources, and of minimizing human-caused forest fires. And this is a picture of the car stopped in a small town and school children lined up to go on board. It's a large car, 84 feet long, 16.5 feet high. In addition to acting as a mobile theater where they showed films, it was packed with educational displays. And the car still exists. It's been retired and is on display at the Agricultural Museum in Austin, Manitoba. And here it is with the CNR signage. I'm sorry, I don't have a better picture. Perhaps somebody will find me one. When the rail car was concentrating its work in the south, or when when they were trying to get to communities that weren't along the rail lines, then they used these cars. Both Ford, General Motors, and Studebaker donated in different years vehicles for them to use. The programs usually ran from as early as April to as late as the end of October. Picture on the right is a little bit of a picture of the interior of the rail car, showing some of the displays. The man on the left, my mind is going blank right now, I can't remember his name. He worked out of Manitoba, and he's the one that organized these tours for many, many years. So there was a lot of excitement when the forest car would come to town. When the ad went on the Facebook for this talk, one of the comments on it was from a fellow who attended the car as a student in the little place called Pisane, which is between Tisdale and Hudson Bay. And he said that was one of the highlights of his school year, was attending that car. Sometimes the first show would be sold out, and families would wait until a second showing. Sometimes they'd stand on wagons or in the back of trucks, appear in the windows to see what was going on. It was a big deal, and especially in the more isolated small towns, certainly from 1920 up until into the 50s. Some of those people had never seen a moving picture before. So it was quite an attraction. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about some of the local areas that were visited by the conservation caravan, not the rail car, but the rubber-wheeled vehicle in 1952. In that year, the educational tour traveled over 6,000 miles, had over 100 programs, and attendance of over 15,000 people. Began on June 3rd and ended on October the 3rd. So they visited the following areas. Some of the names will be familiar, some of them have disappeared, so none of us will be familiar with them. So the Dorothy School, and that's in the Forest Gate area. Anybody know where Bittern Lake is? Mm-hmm. So Forest Gate is between Paddockwood and Bittern Lake. Paddockwood. The Howard Creek School. Candle Lake. Howard Creek School is north of Meath Park, or was north of Meath Park. The Lily Plain School, so west of town. Garthland School, west and south. And Lac Chevel School, also west and south. And I'll have a little bit more detail on some of these visits. So the films that year, each year they had educational, serious films. They also had cartoons or comedy films to help with the entertainment. In 1952, the films shown were Birth of the Soil, Water is Life, Your Forest Heritage, Three Bears on a Spree, I assume that that's one of the comedies, Andy's Animal Alphabet, something for the younger children, and interestingly, an Imperial Tobacco trailer. Times have changed. The films altogether lasted about an hour and a half. Some of you are old enough to remember being shown 8mm films in school. It came on reels about this big and went click, 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 click as they were turning. Yeah, so in between changing the reels, watching the films, about an hour and a half. So a few excerpts from the report compiled by the presenter that year. Dorothy School was reached by traveling north on Highway 2 to north side, then east 7 miles and north 5 miles. The two meetings at Dorothy School in Paddockwood were attended by 175 people. For curiosity, I looked it up. Paddockwood's population today is about 50. This really reflects how our population dynamics have changed. We are a much more urban population nowadays than we were in the 1950s. Lily Plain School. Hard to find, so thankful for the help of the conservation officer. The trails run through bushland and with no directional signs. They would have had a hard time finding it without the conservation officer helping them. They noted some soil drifting in the cleared fields due to very light soil. 25 students at that one-room school enjoyed the presentation. Their second showing of the day, the field officer guided us a further 35 miles through the bush to Garthland School. 87 people attended the evening meeting in this one-room school. So it was a full house. The next day, met the field officer Don Horncastle in McDowell. Some of you will know the name of Don Horncastle, who was with the DNR and then subsequent departments for many years. He led us from there on the Carlton Trail, which he said dated back to the Riel Rebellion. Uphill and downhill, turning and twisting through the forest, stopping every few miles to open and close gates. The Lac Cheval School served a community of largely Germanic descent that seemed to be prospering in farming. And 60 people attended that meeting.
Interesting that the Germans are at a place that's got a French name.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
Lac Cheval is now known as Horse Lake. It's just north of Duck Lake.
Oh, okay, yeah. So it is a lake, as well as there being a school or a district called
It's a
Lac
big-
Cheval.
It's quite a sizable slough.
Yeah. Thanks, Carmen. The evening program was held at Dorval, which was just 5 miles further south from Lac Cheval. The school was operated by the social welfare branch of the government. It was attended by Métis children. These folk work in the forest, cutting ties and timber. 51 attended the meeting. So that's the end of my presentation on the conservation caravan. I'll tell you a little more about the Forest History Society. We are always interested in hearing your stories about events or activities in the forests of Saskatchewan. Not even have to be your own stories, stories you've heard from others. We're also very interested in old photos, films, or books relevant to the forest history. Some of the local history books have proven to be a real treasure trove of stories and photos about the forest history. We've started to try and make a collection of those so that we can use those as source material for our Echoes in the Forest publications. So please consider contributing your knowledge to help preserve our forest history. If you are interested in joining the organization, just $25 for a membership fee. The membership fee will include your first copy of Echoes in the Forest, and then we have a renewal fee of $20 a year. My wife Rosalie has got copies of the first 5 issues of Echoes in the Forest, and she also has some membership applications. Rosalie, do you want to wave your arm so people know who you are? And we also have those copies available for $10 a piece. I want to thank you for attending, and thank you to Connie Gerwing for arranging the meeting and the Historical Society for hosting the talk. And I'm happy to answer questions and to listen to your comments. So I'll open the floor up to questions or comments.
Are those films found anywhere now?